Hello, hi. We're here all together and having a post-performance conversation. And I'm Karen Finley, and I'm delighted to be here with the three wonderful performers who just were here at the Skirball performing Wild Boar. And I'd like the artists to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Truscot. I'm a New York-based performance maker.
Hi, I'm Ursula Martinez, and I'm from London.
I'm Zoe Coombs Marr. I reckon you can tell I'm Australian.
So we're here talking about the performance, but just also about your practice. And the performance, which I've seen, is just very evocative and is speaking, just for people who haven't seen it and are hearing the video, is taking the bad critique or the bad review as the source of the performance of the information. And then you're also working together, and I was just so intrigued that you have your own private practice, that sound like doctors.
Yes.
Doctor for your own private
Make a lot more
practice.
money that way.
And now you're starting your clinic, but you joined together to do this very over-the-top, hilarious, evocative, feminist, institutional critique about the bad review. And the response was fantastic. And so my first question is how you're collaborating together. How did this all come together? How did you want to work together, or did all of you just say, did you read this review? How did this come together, this project?
It was quite organic. Like we often got mentioned our work and other people, like in articles when we were at the same festivals. Like there'd be some sort of side article that mentioned us or our work, or like what kind of risks we take or something. And then we would often be hanging, like we did become sort of comrades through just doing a bunch of festivals, and then at first very casually and offhandedly socially sharing like the ludicrousness of some reviews that we would get, where they just like refused to see you as a competent theater maker. And then we were kind of riffing on that, and then an opportunity came up to make something, and we were like, maybe we should just do this thing.
Yeah, it did. It was part of it. I think, especially in the sort of festival circuit that Adrienne's talking about, which is like a lot of sort of fringe festivals, international festivals and fringe festivals. Like I think we all find that we sort of operate in kind of like fringe and comedy and sort of arts worlds going in between those, and kind of on this sort of loose international circuit. That there's also, that goes along with that, there is this real kind of like this kind of cycle of reviews that happens, and it's
and
sort
a real
of like
culture of a live or die culture of reviews.
And like it's very star based, and it's like, as in like, how many stars did a show get and what's on the poster, and so it's very present in this way that we sort of started saying, especially because we exist in both those like kind of quite commercial or like mainstreamy type of comedy worlds sometimes. Like I'm a stand-up, and Adrienne does stand-up as well. Urs is very funny. but it is this thing when you exist in both of those worlds of going like, hang on a second, like this thing is being reviewed in this very particular way, and when you take a step out and you look at the way that same work might be critiqued in or received in a different context, you start to kind of see the gaps in what role are those critiques actually playing, and where are the gaps in the understanding there that just become quite blatant, I think, when viewed through different lenses and through different experiences.
And also just the blatant misogyny and just the cruelty about it, and the diminishment that happens with women who are creating work using their bodies, and the fact that they're being diminished by these reviewers. I think it's very cruel, and it's part of this misogyny. So I was very moved by it, and for your courage to stand up, but also to be standing up with humor which I like to just tell for people who are with us right now, is that the performance starts out with showing, your asses, right? So it starts out, and so there's this that becomes like the face, and that becomes the butt of the joke, and all these kind of places, but also the reduction where you have used this way of using your own body and reducing yourself to your ass. So I want to know, it's like it's funny, but it's also really there's a sadness in it too, right? There, it comes out of a space it doesn't come out of for me as a viewer, it doesn't come out of a space of joy. It comes out of a place of some conflict resolution of this, the trauma, that you're using your body in that way. So I wanted to hear from you about making such a decision, because it's like and it was beautiful, but I mean, I thought the decision and to be there and to sustain the humor and to be laughed at where the woman's body is laughed and put into the spectacle, I'd like to hear about that a little bit.
Yeah, but also the arse is quite a genderless sort of part of the body, although sometimes some other little parts peek through too. Yeah, the arseholes came about. These two are the smart ones in the group, okay?
Couldn't agree more.
No, these
No,
two
it's
are
absolutely true.
It's
Zoe.
true. I like to think of myself as the pretty one.
These two are the smart ones in the group, but that's not to diminish at all my contribution. And when they were talking about, we want critiquing and coming from a feminist viewpoint and this and that, and we're going to use the reviews and especially and it's going to be kind of like meta and rooted also in the canon of Shakespeare and Hamlet and at one point it was kind of like getting a bit too much, and I said, look, I'm just worried that we're just going to come across as pretentious arseholes, and I don't I'm not interested in a piece of theatre that where we're going to come across as pretentious arseholes. It was almost as kind of like
pretty much
you literally
word.
said, I don't want us just to be talking out of our
asses.
And then we all
unless
were
we're
like,
actually talking out of our asses, and then we all
there
just
was
went.
no avoiding it once that was in the room.
I don't want to be talking out of our asses unless we're talking out of our asses,
Like
really our asses,
right.
Then that's okay.
Then
Was that
then,
your
then it
kitchen
was fun
table?
to be pretentious assholes.
Then it was fun to be pretentious assholes if we are quite literally talking out of our asses. And as soon as that fell on the table, we couldn't take
broke
it back.
for the rest of the day.
We couldn't put it back in.
That's how great ideas come together.
Yeah, we were like, well, we have to do that now.
Well, and it was also because we had the title, and the title also in part was addressing this notion of we all do, make these big decisions like perform naked and perform in drag, pull things out of our bodies, put things in our bodies. And we all thought that's such a hallmark of feminist performance work, right? And what if it was a step further was to not do that, to not do the spectacle of that, and just sit around talking like sort of boring assholes, and not make this effort to engage the audience on our terms and all this stuff. And so so that was a fun question. It was what does wildly boring look like? There's such a weird tension there. And so when Ursula said that, it was that is wildly boring. We're going to be boring. We're going to seem boring, but it'll be utterly wild because it'll be our ass puppets.
Well, I felt that the position of having the three derrieres on the platform or the table, and then for our listeners, that you then took that motif further in terms of the design, right? And then you even speak about that, about how that comes into the reviews about designing the set, and then you have the derrieres on display and the way that you have the display. But I feel that you took the the body, and there's a sense of distortion or abstraction. So by isolating that body part, became kind of unrecognizable, recognizable, right? So there's this distortion in the masking. And so so if we took away the sound, I found that the words, that this distortion was really fascinating, thinking about in terms of with art, right, of having, like this distortion or the surrealism and having it all masked using the design. Were you thinking about that at all? Was that unconscious or intuitive, the way how you were, the idea of having this understanding of the display and having, the design of how you were designing your work?
Do you mean the distortion as in the fact that the asses become sort of like human faces quite quickly? Or?
Yes, because you're cutting, there is, in terms of art history, that you'll see the body being fragmented, and in particular the female form, where the female is cut up, especially like you'll see in surrealism or in cubism. And so you're actually cutting up the form, and but you're doing that yourself. And you're not just reducing it to the torso, right? You're making it, you're reducing it even more, but then you're doing it as a group. So, and then I was even thinking of the wild boar, and the other sense of boar, is a sense of like a wild pig, and that being a euphemism that's spoken to in terms gendered, right? So I was very moved by that as well, so that there is this glorious deliciousness with the humor, but if you also were underneath the jokes and the humor, there was this stillness with the images, because the images weren't moving a lot at that time. They were you're just having like a little pencil going up, by the asshole, or a hand would come, but it was very, very subtle. So could you speak about those subtleties of that relationship, or it was very counterintuitive of having the language and the verbosity and the humor, but yet the images were very still and sullen.
I do remember, and like early in the conversation, like after the idea of the metaphorical and the literal talking out of our asses was in the room, and that felt like we had been sort of waiting for that moment, like moving forward, but when you're like, it's not right yet, and then that was the moment of like, now we know how we start the show, ass out, talking assholes. I do remember us having a bit of conversation about how it was interesting, since we all get dressed or undressed, or as we present our undressed selves on stage, you still, even if you're doing that in order to critique everyone else doing it to your body, you still get that critique. And I do remember us being like, it is sort of funny that like it's this less gendered part of the body, and like the less sexualized, at least in commercial ways, and that funnily enough we were presenting something that culturally might be considered the most you could present, and yet you weren't seeing the parts that like you want. Like you weren't seeing our tits, you weren't seeing our pussies, you were just seeing assholes that might not seem as inviting to the male gaze as the other parts of our cisgender
And I think
bodies.
also in terms of like the stillness thing that we talked about, I think pretty early on was just working out how long we held that for. It was very much like, how long do we hold it before they see our faces, and that's I think that was a big thing.
How long can we get away with?
Yeah, and how long can we? And that I think was part of the idea of it being very boring. And one other thing that we set ourselves pretty early on was like, we want to talk about all these things, but one thing that was like, every decision was sort of like, what's the most audacious, almost just rude decision that we could make? Like, what can we actually get away with? And so that was, I think, one of the things of like holding those images for a really long time. And so then also when the curtains part and then you see it's just another table that we've like, oh, that would be so rude if we've just held this like boring image of a trestle table with a black skirt, and then you open the thing up and it's just a bigger trestle table with a black skirt. We were like, it's such a to everyone, but so joyously so as well, I think.
But isn't that how theater is constructed too, about, you know, the long view and the short view? I mean, I think it was speaking about film as well, like the establishing shot or point of view, and, you know, the distance that you were, it was, so I really, I appreciated that you had different ways of how people construct art or seeing art, whether it's going to be film, and then you're saying with the comedy, the performance, and the theater. I wanted to find out a little bit about your relationship to humor and the importance of humor, because you're very, at least from seeing this work, is your commitment to humor and the commitment to the laugh and the commitment to manipulating the audience with that and to take that in that direction, and the physicality that you use, but then also the jokes. So you're using both. You have the physical humor and then you have the language, right? And then the audience all being together, that you have that communal feeling. Could you, I'd love to hear about what your relationship is and why humor for you is the best place, you know, to do your work.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, these two would describe themselves as comedians. I wouldn't describe myself as a comedian. I'm primarily a theatre maker, but yeah, comedy runs through all my work, and it's a very important ingredient. And for me, it's instinctive. I don't know how to make a piece without putting humor in, and I wouldn't have the courage to make a piece that doesn't have humor in it.
Which was one of the things that when we were originally thinking about this piece, is like, what if we don't?
What if it's not funny?
What if it's not funny? What if it's actually just some sort of existential, boring
And you
drivel,
ask that, don't you do that in the show too? Isn't that kind of inferred, you feel? I felt that as a viewer.
Oh, but yeah, we talk about like not funny, not
clever, not funny,
clever.
not
I think for where I'm coming from personally, but I think we all are coming just in slightly different, from different angles. I think humour is really important to all of us, and that's also part
what has
of
brought us together.
What brought us together, what we're interested in. And I think it's that sort of thing of like, where our skills and interests lie is in making people laugh and doing that to different. Humor, I think, is just a particular tool, right? And so you can use it in order to impart different messages, or to talk about different things, or access different kinds of content. But it really is, I think, you know, where you're saying like that the audience is all together, it's just a very unifying sort of thing, because it actually gives the audience the response, like the capacity to respond in the space, and you can actually sort of build on that in the space, and it creates a very, very live situation, as
right, and
opposed to
it's immediate empathy that you can clock as happening, like, oh, I thought that was funny and so did you, whereas like two still people, one could feel sad and moved and one could be livid that they are sitting through
And
this
you wouldn't know.
tripe, but you wouldn't know,
and they don't know either. So it's, I think,
Right.
with humor, what laughter creates is it's a statement from the performer that then becomes a response from the audience, and they're not just speaking to you and affirming to you, the performer, they're also affirming to each other, and so that you can sort of create a different kind of thing in the room. That's what I am very interested in that sort of sense, especially when we're talking about quite serious sort of things in terms of like identity politics and performance and what it means, and sort of very academic things. I think it's also quite fun to be able to use kind of the almost very base and very complex humour, and comedy has very complex structures, but they are tricks essentially, to use that in order to talk about quite big concepts. I think is
and it's also a bit of a like we might not be able to use the master's tools to demolish the master's house, but you could give it a good bash, and like it's a way, particularly for like feminist work, to disprove the notion that whatever, now it's disproved unless you're absolutely an idiot, but that like feminism is not a angry, no fun. It's just like, and that is one of the easiest ways to prove the point that the work you're making comes from a feminist place, but can, by using comedy, can do two things at once. To me, it can disprove all of that bullshit that would be the first line of
it's humorless
attack.
Yeah.
And then secondly, it can be insurgent because it can relax people and make them more open to hearing what you're saying. I also feel like it has a role that I've been noticing lately in like, if there's a mean kind of laughter in the world that anyone who's like othered or queer or, you know, has experienced in a diminishing way, that's a tool you can flip, and you can kind of use it to like locate, dislocate, and relocate comfort for the people who maybe don't. That's what I've experienced. Who don't get it in a public space, in an audience, and suddenly like the laughs in this massive way are not at the expense of the people who are whatever, confronted more struggle. And that feels like a thing I notice when I in this ongoing thing about who's using comedy and how, and it's increasingly not just comedians but makers using it as a way to recontextualize the space you can do your work in.
Because I think often people will say things like, "Oh, I hate comedy," and it's like, "Oh, you don't act." When people say like, "I don't like comedy," or I don't like, it's that they don't. Or no one's like, "I hate laughing."
Right.
I don't like fun. I don't enjoy enjoying
myself.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a review there somewhere that they're saying that. It's too funny. I'm sure that this isn't a laughing matter.
It is. There's lots of reviews
Yeah.
that like, they're like, and the entire, like you can feel the entire audience was laughing. Like, must have been
Sounds
funny.
good. Yeah.
You're angry.
As though they're one, like, and it's so brilliant because that statement completely inoculates the one ding-dong reviewer from the possibility that there's the only person in the room that doesn't get it.
Oh, well, there's nothing more alien. I mean, when you talk,
Right.
especially about, like, marginalised groups, like, if you're, like, the one queer person in an audience laughing at a homophobic joke, there's nothing more alienating and isolating than that, because you're in the middle of, like, a unified sort of audience, which is why it can be such a great thing. It can also be, it can be used for both good and evil.
I also like to use humour a lot to establish a mood, and in my solo practice, I will kind of, at key points, I will whip that away quite cruelly in order to make a very different point cut through.
Because there's a vulnerability, right? And from the laughter, there's a space within the body, you mean, that you can use that to...
No, I can establish laughter and then introduce something that is the opposite of something to make you laugh, and the laughter is there to contrast heavily with the point that I can then come in and make that's kind of like quite dark, and so it gives it it just gives it more emphasis.
Resonance.
I think it also shows, especially like in terms of what we're doing in this show, which so much of it is about we're doing this intentionally. These things are choices. Whereas, so if you're creating like it shows that you're in control as well. That thing where you're like, I am showing you I can make you laugh, and now when I make you not laugh, you can see that is a very deliberate thing, because it's not because I can't make you, because I just made you laugh, and now I'm choosing to
do
say something different.
else.
Which was a huge part of this piece, was having to, because we found in our research, we first looked at our own reviews, and then we looked beyond to our other friends, and then just other like famous artists, and just noticed all of these consistencies around like sort of feminist experimental work. One of which was that we had no idea what we were doing, and anything the reviewer did like, it was sort of assumed they had somehow made it good with their attention and liking of it. That the makers had not created that moment. And it was just this constant, like, unbelievable refusal to give, like, feminist makers the benefit of the doubt that we knew and had intended to put X on stage. Not that maybe it was intentional and you didn't like it, but just that you'd shown up to the theater every day being like, I've never done this. I don't know what to do. This is going to be a mess, but let's just start the show.
A good example of it was that the show that I actually talk about in Wild Boar, which I talk about a particular scene, but that was another aspect of it, which was this was a show that had, at a certain point of the show, 25 volunteer performers came on stage, and then they perform the rest of the show, and they perform there are screens that give them, it's an instructional performance that then takes over the scripted performance that we were already doing. And we had more than one reviewer say, thank God for the volunteers, they were the best thing about the show. I hate this, the show that they made was awful, but the volunteers were great, as though they'd just like run in from off stage, like that. It was like no,
that is the show.
That's the show. We put them there and wrote the stuff they were saying and and trained them to do that thing so that you would like them more than the thing. That's why we ended the show with them. Yeah. It was this bizarre kind of thing where you're just like, what are you watching?
Yeah. Another one where I would get that I'd run out of material, but I ran out of material every night. Because it was like a 2.5 week run, and it was just like, so I know you came on the one night, and I realized on one night there's the possibility that somebody ran out of material. Or that you forgot something and went really early. But I was like, if you could bear to give me the benefit of the doubt, don't you think that at approaching 50, I would not still be showing up to a theater and be like, I can't believe I haven't thought of anything for that last half hour. Jesus. God, I thought something would come to me today. God damn it. Well, open the doors. Let's give it a go. It's just like, it's so insane, right?
And you just wonder where the people that are reviewing, what their background is in terms of what their credentials or qualifications to be looking at experimental work, or the questions to be asking. And that's something that I do like so much now that you're reviewers on the internet, and there's you have more access to different reviewers. But
or the reviewer who wrote about my show where I build a brick wall between me and the audience. I mean, you could say it's a metaphor, but it's also not even a metaphor. It's a fourth wall.
Yeah.
We're in a theatre. And how can a theatre...
It's almost too obvious. I mean,
it's almost too obvious, right? Yeah. Even if you don't get the metaphor, you should at least get that it's a fourth wall.
In a theatre.
If you're a theatre reviewer, how can a theatre reviewer write that she assembles a wall between her and the audience for no apparent reason? How can you write that as a theatre reviewer?
Yeah, it's kind of amazing. But thank God that person wrote that, because we've really dined out on it for a long time.
Do you have any further collaborations you're thinking about, or what are your next projects, or from this that has this brought you? Was this a work that becomes a conclusion? So, okay, that's done. Or does it bring about and inspire other work, either personally or in collaboration?
Wow.
Well, we don't actually speak outside of professional we haven't talked about making a new show.
It was when it came... It felt like a singular provocation and a singular, like, we're going to break the one rule you're not meant to break, because we didn't make the rule, someone else did. So, and then it felt like these were the exact right people to do that. So that felt really specific, but not that it means to the exclusion of a
it certainly felt like the kind of perfect collaboration, that what we created is definitely more than the sum of our parts, and that we created something that individually it would never have happened. And it was just the kind of chemistry in the room. And
So is it magic enchanting?
But
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of like pure collaboration as well, which is that you do create something that's more than the sum of its parts. But I also think it's about like, you know, I think there's something to be said to working across different genres or being like breaking kind of the boundaries that are set of like, well, this is this kind of work and this is this, which I think we all do in our practice individually. And I think some particular, the great thing about that is like certain ideas are best served by a particular form or a particular genre or a particular show and context. And for this show, I think that part of that context was this unique collaboration, because individually, I don't think any of us would have been able to access the sort of like ballsiness of speaking to our critics, but it was and this is where the kind of, where it sort of, its genesis was as well, was the conversation when you're talking to other women and you're talking to other, female performance makers and going like, I got this review which I think might be really misogynistic, did you? And then going like, yeah, I got this one that's the same, and it's finding those patterns and stuff. So I think the strength, we were able to do the thing that you're not meant to do because there were three of us, and because we were all sort of established in these slightly different ways, that we had this kind of weird stronghold that we could kind of go like, oh yeah, like we could bolster it. I think that's sort of what worked with this particular thing.
We by being three, we were able to avoid the possible look of a single person whinging about a bad review. Like it immediately made it on the level of discourse by having several people in it. And because we were all established at a sort of commensurate level, we couldn't, and we'd all won award, like we couldn't be dismissed as bad makers. Like we have been misunderstood, but we've prevailed in spite of all of that. So we were in a position to say, let me tell you where you're actually wrong, and actually say no, you actually didn't get it.
And that we were speaking to, it brought it into something that we were speaking to something bigger than ourselves as well. That was like, it became verified information that sort of then could ripple out further. So I think that's what was so perfect about this thing. But we haven't sort of talked about like, oh, well, let's make a show about.
Because it was also
something else.
perfect in that way. Because like even reviewers came and they were like we made a show that you can't review badly because a bad review is brilliant and a good review is brilliant. So there's a way in which it wouldn't serve us to make anything else together, because if it wasn't as clever and as good as this, it'd be like, wow.
I remember the first time I was reviewed to post Wild Boar. It was quite scary. I'm like,
oh God.
I just put you in my last show saying you were an idiot, and now you're going to review my next show. Uh-oh.
But there's a history in comedy where in stand-up of speaking about whether it's reviews or popular culture or currents too. So I think that I think that there is some tradition in that. And also being at the university here, I thought it really spoke to critique or institutional critique and even performance reviews or criticism by academia as well. So that I think that you were probably speaking more about popular journalism, but these type of reviews happen, or criticism happens in academia as well, that and that there's these levels of knowledge of who knows more and who has that knowledge. So I found that the work was very subversive on that level, because you are you're taking on the review, and how dare you, and who and you should know more. The idea that the artist doesn't know, the artist is as if it just comes from some instinctual place, especially I think it's very gendered. So that is what was happening, and I hope that this would really inspire our students, because we do have the theater, the film, and everyone is so damn concerned about the review and about their whole life can fall apart. I mean, it really is. So that when your life doesn't fall apart, and you find friends and you find collaboration, and you take agency with that. So I hope that this will be inspiring to our next generation, and to have that laugh with it. So that's why I'm really glad to see that here at the school. And another comment I was thinking of is that the work, I felt, could also be a system, because it could be interesting to have it as, I would say, like a class assignment, but as a space for art makers or theater makers, that if you get bad reviews, that there could be, once a month at a club, that you could have a table and 3 at a time, you have your, you take your ass out there and you read that review. And it would be, you just do that. So it becomes, when I was thinking about that, it became actually like a formula,
so
that
we
you
need to
do.
put like Peachy Coochie, like Petra Kuchel or something, like kind of, we need to patent it as an idea.
So it's just, it's like it's a place that be doing it, but it also could be a space, someone would be patenting it, but be thinking of it as a space of also service, that it could be a place that there that this would happen, and that there is a place that you could go, and that it becomes cathartic, right?
I love that.
And
New kind of therapy.
You just have that there, and so you have a bad review, and and you sign up, and it is like right? So you do, because you sign up, and I think, what is it? You have like a certain amount of time and everything.
20 seconds,
And so you could give people, it could be the 1 minute or 2 minute review, and you get
really
3.
funny.
I mean, so I thought that was
Well,
funny.
there is a system to that. A friend of mine, Amanda Duarte, runs it's done now, but for a few years she was running this thing called Dead Darlings at Judson, and you would go up and do material that you cut. And you could have cut it because you did it once and it bombed so badly, or it's because you wanted to do it but it felt actually not okay, or any number of things. Like, I did the jokes that I actually thought were too much to make it into asking for it. Like the ones that come up because you know how to write jokes, and you're like, I don't think there's any need to actually say that. I'm going to say it here because it's hilarious, but I'm actually not going to put that out in the world. But when I did that material, especially when it's called Dead Dark, it gives you this. There's no way for the material to fail.
Yeah.
Because everyone's already agreed to watch your failure in this sense of community. So similarly, there's no bad review. That if it's here's the terms are, you get to have this moment of catharsis and read out how shitty your review with whatever angle, but you do have to do it out of your asshole. But I'm here to tell you from experience, your asshole will be beloved in this as you do it, because there is a vulnerability, of course, to saying someone said this about my work, and even though I think it's wrong, maybe I do just sound like a whinging asshole.
Yeah, well, there is the thing of it is amazing how much just talking about a bad review or sharing it can actually sort of debunk it in a way, or diffuse it, because it's they have so much power, because and sometimes they're right. It's hard to think that anyone would be sitting in your show going, I hate this. But I think that's one of the risks that you run just by putting anything out there. But it is sort of, it's kind of enjoyable to just go it doesn't destroy your life. Actually, it feels like it's going to, but it doesn't. And I think that's why we also talk about the canon and stuff as well. We talk about sort of Shakespeare and stuff. It's just because there's an institution that is saying this is right and this is wrong, and it doesn't necessarily mean that. And then if that thing says you're wrong, well, it doesn't necessarily mean you are either. You can actually survive bad reviews if you're trying to do something else that it's not looking for.
Well, and also even on a deeper level, that a theatrical experience doesn't have to be one that the audience perceives as successful in order for it to be worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of things you can experience in an audience that the artist could intend that is not necessarily that was a great show. That's something I've been thinking about a lot lately because it feels like a very sort of linear intention.
Yeah.
That is not necessarily what I'm interested in. Thank God.
You mean spaces of discomfort or what?
Yeah, I think comfort and discomfort. Like I was on a panel with Rachel Mars, who's a woman who makes theater in London, who we all know, and we were all talking, and we were. It was a panel about women making work and using comedy in different ways, and it was a little bit of a binary and sort of sarcastic point of discourse, but we were talking about doing things differently and like how a joke has like a setup, a build, a punchline, and then it's over, and we were like, yeah, it's like it's very like heteronormative, like an ejaculatory
there's a lot of
function, and I was like, and we were all talking about how we make work that's like maybe takes you near the punchline, but then it does something else and you get the punchline later, and then Rachel just goes, yeah, we make cunt-shaped work. And I was like, we were all like, maybe we do, or that you know, there was something useful in thinking about it as like multi-orgasmic and like just you know.
Well, I was talking to you about this recently as well, because I was talking in a different talk, it was the same sort of thing, which is like there is, but I think there is something in that where it's like, oh yeah, I think that there are a few theories about it as well, which is like the shape of like orgasm as being like linear and like big finish end point
finale,
very like clear, and then going like circular looping kind of it's. Yeah, it's funny. I think it's a funny metaphor.
Yeah,
and I think it's also endearing and enchanting and makes fantastic performance too. So I really enjoyed speaking with you, and I feel right now in listening to you that that the work is funny and there's a hilarity to it, but it comes out of a depth and a consideration and a dedication and a hope, and that is what's very inspiring for me, and I think for our viewers, and I'm just so happy that you've been able to be here at Skirball and at NYU, and I hope that we're going to be having you here again, and that also our students are going to be inspired and to not feel despondent because they get one or two bad reviews, and to take agency and to make that their own. And also I like the aggressiveness of it too. I love that.
There is one thing as well that we hadn't anticipated when making the work. We wanted to make people laugh, and one of the things that we hadn't anticipated was a lot of people found it very moving, particularly towards the end, the kind of like final scenes and the chaos and the frenzy and the liberation and they found it, a lot of people found it very moving and very cathartic, and we hadn't even necessarily anticipated
at other festivals.
That reaction.
We do have like younger makers come up, and you feel like they've had a bit of a moment of like excavating space of like, I can make this kind of work, and that feels very.
Because I think the other thing which we haven't really mentioned is the aspect of, that at the end, spoiler alert, that when Krishna comes out, and that was always a really important thing for us as well, that it's a really audacious show, but it was important for us to have that generosity in there as well, to open ourselves up to real critique, and it's to see like what is the difference between like bogus criticism, which is just like, oh, this person didn't understand it, and then going like, the work is actually not beyond real genuine critique, and that is a really valuable thing, is like someone actually engaging with the work. So us going like, well, what are the actual critiques you have? And we're like, well, we're 3 cis white women making this work, and why have we been given this platform? So to have like a trans person of colour come on, and then to go like, yeah, but fuck you all, and we're kind of like, oh yeah, all right. there's an absorption of that. So it's it was always important for us to expand that in another way, to go like,
and to be critique, to actually have, and to actually
because a thorough critique needn't be a wound.
No.
It's just a critique. And if you're actually a mature maker, you can engage with your critique if you feel like it comes from a place of genuine engagement. Then you can go, oh yeah, I'm happy to look at that about my own work. I'm happy to look at my own limitations or what my intentions were and if they're interesting or not at this stage in the world or anything. That doesn't ever feel bad.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But it's, yeah, I think it's that thing of going like, well, critique in general is not bad. In and of
just
itself,
bad critique
it's just,
is
but
bad.
bad critique is bad, and not all critique is,
Right.
it's not all created equal.
Yeah.
Do you want to say any final remarks or anything? Do you have anything else you'd like to?
I guess
we
just
done
that the work should tour more in North America. It's so valuable.
Let's hope that happens.
Yeah.
Anything else
Thanks
you'd like
for
to say?
No, just thanks for having us. It's
Yeah,
been
it's
great.
great to talk to you.
Wonderful
Thanks
to
for
talk to you.
chatting.
Thank you for taking the time, and it was really a pleasure. Thank you.